Hey lads, welcome back. Shoes here, This Irish Life. Hope you're all keeping very well and ready for the final episode of this epic saga. And if you've made it this far, fair play to you. Fair play to you. I'm surprised I made it this far. We're going to finish up and we're going to wrap up the tale of Ireland and indeed, is it the tale of Europe and possibly the world? I don't know. Um, it has been a fun exercise to investigate, but I've definitely reached the point now where I can be settled enough to say, well, I've investigated about as deep as I can go now, and you could spend all the time in the world on these rabbit holes. But this was a fun one, and I made quite a robust video series on the back of it. So 10 episodes, multi-part episodes. Um, yeah, it's been great fun. Great fun. So before we kick back into Slane where we left off in the last one, I just want to remind ourselves of the story of Slane and that Sláine of the Firbolg, Sláine and his brothers who conquered Ireland way back whenever. We equate the Firbolg to the Normans and the Moors and the Empire of Rus, the people of the Roses. So Sláine came to Slane and he cut down all the trees in Brunabóna. And there's a common understanding that the word kill, Kil, is associated with a church. So in Ireland, a lot of places are called Kill. Kildare, Kilkenny, Kilcock, Killarney. It's kill. It's non-stop kill, kill, kill in the place names. And traditionally, that has always been associated with the word church. So Kill is a church, and it was named Kill because some saint or martyr or some person or another apparently built a church there back at some time, way before records began. And now it's called Kill because it was a church there. But in our journey, we remember that Sláine came in and we speculated that he cleared the giant trees in Brunabóna. And that's what the story says. It says that he came in and he cleared the forests of Brunabóna. And in the story of the Garden of Eden scenario, where you have the miners coming in and taking control of the natural world and extracting resources from it, essentially like the story in Avatar, the movie. Um, but they came in, they cut down all the trees. So here in Ireland, we have that kill is also a word for wood or a forested area or an area of trees. And that's less commonly known because the word quill, Choil, and quill means a wooded area, a wood. So a lot of the areas that have churches probably have churches because that was when the miners came in and when they were terraforming the land, they cut down the trees in that area. And then it was Kildare, Killarney, Kilcock, um, endless, as I said, endless. So I thought that was just an interesting reminder of Slane because Slane is where we're picking off our journey again. And as you remember, we were looking at the landscape and we've speculated that underneath all of this mud is a giant system of star-shaped canal structures that is now made from limestone, and that is the rock that all these walls here, all these sections, these are all gigantic walls. All of these are. If you go down on the ground, you can see it. If you look in the other videos, we look at it in depth in the video series. And we discovered that if you remove all of the mud from these, you have it's almost like a star fortress. And I've been calling them a star fort mega well because they seem to be a multifunctional structure, like a pyramid in nature. So they're stepped down and they're terraced down, and we can see here that if we go from the River Boyne, which we said is a canal, so this is originally a canal, so this is all paved on both sides with large blocks of limestone, so heavy masonry on both sides here. And we actually have the Boyne Navigation Canal, which is a remnant of the old, bigger, gigantic Boyne Canal, which was a multi-canal system, we have speculated, going across all here. See this floodplain? Underneath this floodplain here, we'd have probably several different channels all running down the Boyne. And you've got the star shape, and it's all starred, all this area. And underneath then, the land slopes up in a terrace. So it would be all paved and it slopes up here, and then it flattens out slightly, and then it slopes up again, and then you're at the top of the Hill of Slane. And the Hill of Slane, at the top of the Hill of Slane, this is where Sláine, the first High King of Ireland, the first Fir Bolg, who was we prophesied or we proposed was possibly the Normans, and all of the other races of Ireland. He is apparently buried up here, and there was a healing well up here that Dean Cecht, member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, used to restore vitality and health to the Tuatha Dé Danann warriors who were fighting in the Battle of Moyturra, which we discussed in great detail in the episodes at the start of this series. And we discussed the story of how the Fomorians dropped stones into the wells in order to stop the healing wells from being able to restore health to the Tuatha Dé Danann who were falling in battle. And we joined the dots that is the mud and that is the dirt. So whatever happened to these wells, that these were not always covered in mud, and that underneath there is gigantic structures all over the landscape. The whole land, there is nothing left that is natural in this world by the looks of it. And it was this conclusion that we moved forward with a lot of our discoveries, and we get a particularly good view of it here. It just slopes down. Just imagine it's a gigantic fortress, like we saw in Mexico, like we see under the ground in Mexico, and all the ruins that were dug out of the mud in South America. It's the same all over the place. It's the same civilization. So as our journey carried on, we looked at more and more. We looked at Tara, the Hill of Tara, we saw down here, sloping down. It's very gentle slopes and very gentle gradients. But when you're on the ground, it is actually quite stark, and you can see that like this is flat, and then this slopes down, and then that slopes down, and then that's flat, and then this slightly slopes, and you have your star shapes all here, or your triangles. They're not even stars, you call them stars. Some are stars. And then you have your church here with the graveyard at the top of the fort again. So on top of the hill, you've got your church. So this is the picture of the world we were looking at. We carried on, we looked at more pictures of Tara, we just examined the landscape, and just the more we looked at the areas, we looked at Teltown, the area of Taltu, the last Fir Bolg goddess, the godmother of Lug, Lavada, who of the Tuatha Dé Danann. Also Tara, this area here, if you're only picking it up, this is the area of the High Kings of Ireland. This is the seat of the High Kingship of Ireland, and this is where all of the battles and all of the great tales of Ireland and the legends of Ireland took place, at the Hill of Tara. This hill, this fortress that is now covered in dirt and mud. Just think of Mexico and think of what's under here. So this was the journey. We looked at bogs, and we saw some red flags in the bogs. We looked at Carbery, the area of Carbery that located close to Kildare, and this was the area of the source of the Boyne. This is where we began the journey of the Buried Ireland series, and we looked at the Segus's Well, the source of the Boyne. And Segus's Well, we proposed that was potentially one of these gigantic mega wells that taps into the ground for water and for resources, and then that feeds the canal civilization. So each of these wells we have looked at from our perspective in this series, that we said, did the world end because those wells somehow all exploded their dirt and muck all over the landscape? All of these Starfort mega wells and the bogs we proposed, like, are these just the Starfort mega wells? We looked at mountain bogs as well, which we'll see. Like some of these are on hills, these bogs here. You can't see it with the gradient, but like a lot of the bogs are on hills and they're all covered in mud. And we've just got to we've got to consider, how did this happen? How did it happen? Then we looked at golf clubs. We saw star or triangle patterns in the golf clubs. This is Carbery Bog. Like, what's under the bog? This is Segus as well. This is the source of the River Boyne. And the goddess Boann, who was possibly Eru, who was one of the goddesses of the rivers. And there's a whole area of study into river worship and river magic, and what was happening seems to have been a control of the water and the goddesses of the rivers. Were they the original goddesses before the miners came in? Was it the goddesses of the rivers were tricked into giving their water to the original colonizers? I'm starting to wonder, was this canal civilization here pre-flood as well? I'm wondering, I'm considering, but I'm not sure. Was it the rebuild after the first flood? Or did the first flood happen and destroy most of this civilization? Because as we know, we're looking at Ireland and we look at England and we look at the sea and we wonder to ourselves, has a lot of the landmass fallen away? So we're not really sure where we are in terms of time periods here, but there was a cataclysm in the last couple of 100 years that we're fairly confident of, that spewed out all of this mud and dirt and sand and rubble, and it's all over the hills and the mountains, and it's just everywhere. And then there's masonry, like all of these patterns. These are all walls. These are all walls, like gigantic 3 foot. These are 3 foot wide, 3 foot across. We go into that in detail in the series. And there's Carbery again. You can see it's Carbery Hill. There's a gradient. You can see the gradient. So we're saying, look, you can see on the tree lines, that's where you look. You can see that they terrace up. It's all terraced. Everything is terraced up. And you've got these sharp lines. You can nearly make out the central portions of the underlying structure. So there is a gigantic underlying structure under here. Huge. Carbery. Segus as well. Nuada, leader of the Tuatha Dé Danann, one of the original miners. This is Uisneach. Right here is the hill of Uisneach. We've got a circle around it, I noticed. Circle of bogs, and these are also bogs as well, actually. They look like lakes. They're bogs as far as I remember. But you've got the hill of Uisneach in the centre, and this hill is all terraced down as well. Like, it's just, where you look at the videos and when you pan around and when you start to view it, you have to consider like what was going on in the landscape. It's all limestone. It's all limestone. And we took it a step further, which I'm going to discuss in a minute, as to whether it was limestone. Was it something different? I think this is also the town of Kildare here. I'm not sure of the town. But as you can see, it rolls around. So if this was a town and that was a town, and maybe this is a town, but this town didn't get covered. Maybe there was a town here and a town here. Like, they found a buried town in Ireland. I mentioned it way back when, in one of the podcasts a long time ago. But there's a buried village in Ireland. They say it's a medieval buried village, but it's probably like this. Like, all this area is buried. The whole of Ireland, the whole of the world is buried. Eshbrack Bog, another mountain bog, buried. We looked at that. Uisneach Hill is here. You can see the hill of Uisneach. It rises up. This is the final place of the final battle where St. Patrick, or where Amerigan, the leader of the Milesians, came in and he agreed with Eru, the goddess of Ireland, that they would take Ireland, that the Milesians would take Ireland. And apparently Eru betrayed her husband, of the leader of the Tuatha Dé Danann at the time. It was three brothers, McCool, MacEcht, and McGrain, and they were married to the three Morrigan sisters, Eru, Banba, and Fowla, which we discussed in detail. So it seems that the goddesses of Ireland are responsible for the ownership of the land. So if you can, as I spoke about, like the river magic, was Boann, Eru, were they the river goddesses of Ireland? And then they were conquered or tricked by the invading miners. This is before they built the Star Civilization. And then you had the union of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians, which is symbolized by Daelbath and Eru, or not Daelbath and Ernmas, and they had all of the children that are of the mythical tales of Ireland. So the Dagda, Elaha, Eru, the Morrigan, Dean Cacht, the Fear, well, not necessarily the Fear Bullock, they're supposedly a different race, but the Fear Bullock married in to the Tuatha Dé Danann Fomorian lineage as well, which we discussed. So Taltu, who had the area of Teltown that we just showed, she was a goddess. She was a Fear Bullock goddess. The last Fear Bullock, Queen of Ireland, married to Uchud, and she was the foster mother, apparently, of Lug Lavada. So we propose that basically that all of the races that are discussed in Irish history are all the same race. They're all the same people, and there was one invader that came in, pretending to be them all. So Uisneach, another mud-covered hill, very important. The navel of Ireland, Axis Mundi, I think they call it. The navel of the world. I can't remember. I never remember. So here is Uisneach again. You can see that the hill rises up, terraces up. It's difficult to see here, but look, if you look at the videos, we pan around and we go through it in more detail. So we went through so many areas. We looked at them. We looked at mountains. We looked at these. Look at these odd shapes here and the circles. We looked at all that. We looked at so many areas in the series. So many areas, and it was a slow journey, but a very interesting one, and it needed the time to do it. And what we discovered, it's an odd one, because the infrastructure speaks for itself, and we had to draw the conclusion that there was some other civilization buried under the mud. And because the civilization was so advanced, the consideration as to what the stone was came into play. And because of that, we started to consider what was this material that is now limestone block? What was it before it was limestone and just heavy masonry? Was there a possibility that this was some sort of programmable crystal? Because we've seen examples where these buildings apparently are all lit up. And we know, we've been looking at it for several years now, about the tech on top, all of the buildings that are pretty much machines. We've been looking into that for years, and there's so much evidence to show that this is all technology. So then the next step where we're almost at is this also tech? And if it was tech, how was it tech? So then I was thinking about this chap up here as we were moving along, and I started considering, so if this is tech and this could be animated, for example, like metal, we see a lot of hard metal and hard stone all over the place, and we also see a lot of statues. So I was wondering, is this tech as well? So we started to consider, in the Star Civilization, of the Irish myths and legends, where they were mining all the resources, where they had magical powers, where they could fly and apparently live forever and do all of these crazy things, like we started to think, well, I started to think, I don't know, you must have started to think if you've gotten this far, uh, like was the whole world animated somehow? And I was thinking of the technology and then the rivers. So I came to the conclusions in my own mind that the water is the water is the main fuel of the civilization. And the water was channeled into the canal systems at the most efficient way possible, in line with the geometry of the land and the harmonics of the land. Cymatics were involved, and it was all very, I suppose, natural, geometrical, sacred geometry, Fibonacci spirals and the like, within the landscape. And water was the main fuel of the civilization. And then the water would run under all of these buildings here and beside them, because the water's running in everything in canals. And then it fueled. So I spoke about a book that I have that shows that most of the cathedrals have big water systems running underneath them in different patterns. So from that regard, I'm thinking, did the water somehow interact with this material? And what this material was, you can program water with memory. So if it was programmable water, for example, you could program it, and you could then have these made of crystal. As a crystal, like, imagine indestructible iPad material that is programmable to do whatever you want. Highly, highly intelligent matter, like to a level of beyond current, it's beyond comprehension currently, but like super intelligent matter, because crystal is programmable and water is programmable. And obviously matter, like nature itself is programmable. We're programmable, we are nature, but we are in a different form. So from that, I was thinking, well, what could have happened at the time before this destruction that led to such a level of destruction? So we're talking Atlantis, we're talking high technology, we're talking crystal technology. So I remembered back to an article, this is on Bibliotheca Pleiades. It's a big library of very cool information. But I know this is a bit off the wall, but there's a lady, I know this is channeled material now, because a lot of the information on Atlantis has to be channeled, because there's no real historical stories apart from Plato. But I remember reading this story from years and years ago, and it always caught my attention because it was so similar to Terminator. And Terminator is like my favorite movie ever. Really, really love it. So this concept started to form in my mind of, could you have a Terminator style scenario in Atlantis? And I went and I remembered back to the abuse of crystal technology. And if you want to read this yourself, you can. But basically what this lady said was that the Atlanteans were abusing crystal technology, and that was their downfall. And she is talking about the robot civilization of Orion. So she talks about it in terms of like space and planets and constellations and aliens and that kind of idea. But we're thinking in terms of gods, we're thinking in terms of another civilization, and we're thinking of in Atlantis. So I'll just have a quick, like to give you an idea, this is what she's proposing, is that there was a civilization that was essentially robots, and you could animate the robots with intelligence. So I don't know if it's artificial intelligence or if it's like soul intelligence that she's talking about. But what I really was interested in was the machine nature of them. So there's a story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest pieces of literature in Sumeria, which is where Enki comes from, who I discussed at the beginning of part 10, episode 10, part 10, part 1. The hero Gilgamesh is given a mechanical type friend named Enkidu, similar to what we might think of as a robot. This being is a biological entity, not a machine. So then she's saying like this would be like the men from Orion. And then the Terminator series are a remembrance of the Mars Maldek War of the men of Orion. So are we talking about, like, is this the ruins of this apparent Mars Maldek War? I know they're talking about it in terms of planets here, but we could be talking about in terms of land masses, or, it could be different areas of the planet, Mars Maldek, whatever, that disregard that label. But are we looking at this battle of the machines versus the humans, where the machines became almost self-aware? And we discussed then, as I'm going to go on to, what kind of a world was it where you could have a world of machines coinciding with a world of humans, and what evidence would there be that this could happen? So it's just a very entertaining concept to look at in light of the information that we have. And it has to be considered because all of the statues are so anomalous. So you can't ignore all the statues, as we are going to see, because the statues are everywhere. This is in that cathedral, okay? So the question is, could this have once been animated, or could these have been animated? Like a crystal avatar, like a programmable robot, like a T1000 type of robot with memory, different levels of memory. Some were very clever, some were super smart, others were not, maybe. Others were there to serve a purpose. Like we've got these guys, these are in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But they're all just like frozen in time. So I proposed, as I was looking at these, as if this tech here, right? If this tech all over the world, so all the spires, every town has a church. So there's a network of like relay stations all over the world, and all over Ireland particularly as well, which would allow you to continuously broadcast a wireless signal into the atmosphere, which would allow you to animate a technology such as this. Because what you'd be missing would be a source of power for these robots, or these T1000s, or these crystal matter, or these crystal androids is what they would be. A crystal android, a crystalline android, a shapeshifter. They talk about shapeshifters in the myths. The Enkidus, the friend of Gilgamesh's, these guys, like, they needed an energy source to power, like this. And once the energy source went off, they went off. And this energy source powered these guys, and it also powered the technology of the human, or the biological, the flesh and blood humans. These guys, I don't know what they would have looked like inside. They could have just been like a liquid crystal metal, like a T1000. So that's where my mind was going then, and it was great fun because it's just such a cool concept to consider. And when we looked at this and we said, right, if everything was alive and then it was turned off, it would look like that. So this is once again the basilica, and we look at the floors and we see marble, and we're like, the marble looks like it was once flowing, and then it was stopped mid-flow. It's like someone just turned out the lights, and the lights got turned out, and it stopped in all its beauty and grandeur. But it was something that was just always flowing. Maybe this lady here was like, hello, please welcome to the basilica. Please wipe your feet on the way in. Obviously, she'd have way cooler stuff to say than that. Although you wouldn't know. Look at this in the background here. Like, and it's just like, was this alive? Was this programmable crystal? And then you start to think of the forts. This is a quick reference to the ships and the double-headed eagle that were in the bays in Mayo. So in this area here, this here, I think, lots of ships found in that bay. They call it the Spanish Armada, but were these the ships of the Atlanteans in the bay, sunk in the bay? Anyway, that's a kind of aside. Don't know how that picture got in there. And then we look at these and we just go, and we have to suspend belief completely. We really do. And we look at them, we say, is it possible that these could have been animated? Could these have been almost like robotic crystal clones that got turned off? And here, these are pictures from cemeteries. This is from Genoa, the city of Janus, the city of Noah, the possible creator of all of these guys and this whole civilization. And he's got like this is like a pyramid mausoleum in Rome in a cemetery, and they're all hanging out in the cemeteries. Here's another one sitting at a step in the cemetery. For some reason, they were going to the cemeteries. And we know also that the cemeteries apparently had healing properties where you could be healed. We know that from, or the abbeys had healing properties. And the abbeys also had cemeteries in them with the Celtic crosses and the obelisks and the big tech. And we look at these and we're like, were these animated? Like, did they make all sorts of stuff out of this crystal? Like, was everything like it was almost like the world was fully programmed. It was like it was the ultimate technology system, and it worked for like 1,000 years or whatever the reign of Christ was, and then it broke down, and the invaders came in as we looked at, and the whole system got turned off, or they turned off the system, the people who created it, because did these guys decide that, hey, I'm the real shoes? No, I'm the real shoes. No, I'm the real shoes. Like we looked at the idea of could you have multiple avatars all over the world? And if I wanted to go to Rome, I'd have an avatar in Rome, and I'd just zap myself into that avatar, and then I'd walk around Rome. I could have the chats. I could do all the stuff. I could shape shift. It's like a super cool experience in your avatar. I could have wings. I could grow wings. I could be whatever I want. I could download whatever program I wanted, like almost a matrix. Like I could download myself to be whatever crystal avatar with whatever powers I wanted. And maybe that's why the wars of the gods were so terrible. Maybe they were fighting in these like crystal avatars. And sure, nobody can win. You can't destroy one of them while the civilization is on. It's some far out idea, isn't it? Oh, it's great fun though. Then we have these mausoleums. This is in Highgate Cemetery in England. It's like these are all covered in dirt. It's like what's under them, what was going on in these places. And then you've got more. So if you clean these up, they come up like marble. For some reason, I've seen it there in graveyards where they clean up statues. They come up like marble. So the marble, here's the marble. This is from this is Egypt. So, like, is this the crystal? Is this what it looks like if it's not covered in mud and filth? This bright covering, and then here we've got the brickwork. So all of these tend to go down into the ground. If you remove the dirt, they go down deep into the ground, and they all have these fancy headstones on top of them. And we've got this, which is spooky. Like these random ones, and we're like, why? So if I had an avatar, like let's say this guy I thought was a perfect example. I love this fella. So if I had an avatar in Austria, this guy's from Austria, and this is my Austrian avatar, and if I wanted to zap into Austria, I would zap into this guy, and then I'd wander around Austria, and then when I want to go home, I could zap back to my normal flesh and blood body, or I could zap into a different avatar. Maybe they were just bouncing around avatars. Maybe they lost their bodies. Like, I don't know, was it human people, or I don't know who was using these things or where they were being animated from, or were they like robotic, like as in, were they programmed? Like, I like the idea that you could use it to inhabit, because it seems that that was the case in some circumstances. But also the idea of them being a robot, a free thinking, like was the avatar itself, did they start off as an avatar and then they became aware? Is that what happened? That the matter became aware and just started to think that it was alive, and then they had to turn it all off. Uh, what a rabbit hole. Other thing as well, the different metals. That was always something that puzzled me. Why are some metal and why are some um, made of stone, limestone? Why are some marble? Why are some bronze? Why are some gold? And I'm wondering, was that just like a brand? Do you know? It's like you could get the Apple version of the Avatar, or you could get the Samsung version was like Apple was gold, Samsung was silver. And if you're really fancy, you get like top of the range avatars, and then there was like slave avatars, all that carry on. And it's like the Wars of Orion, the robot world existing with the human world beside it. And so here's a couple more. And I was looking at this, I found this is a Moorish bust, but it is a serious piece of work, and it's attributed to some dude in the 1850s. But what I was proposing with the busts was that it could be like an Alexa in your house or something. So you'd be like, "Hey, Moorish bust, what's the weather like today in southern Egypt?" And she'd be like, "The weather today is," and she'd be talking, she'd be smiling, she might like, I don't know, sing you songs, but like she'd be fancy looking. Your house is beautiful, but it's full of this crystal tech, all this crystal tech that now just looks like inanimate objects to us, like piece golden wands. That was a piece of tech that was animated within the world of the crystal civilization. But like this could have just been a fancy Alexa for all intents and purposes, you know? And she's plugged into the wireless internet that's spewed around through all the spires and the domes and the obelisks and all that carry on. There she is again. No arms. You don't need arms to talk, you know? Don't need arms to talk. So that's where that ended up. It was like, are we talking about crystal types of, some sort of shape shifting, programmable crystal avatar slash robot slash android, can take the form of whatever it touches. You could have wings, it could be like a centaur, it could be you could be whatever you want. Like you're not limited by the flesh and blood. You are able to live in an avatar. And the myths and the legends, they talk about the avatars of the gods, and like Horus, and like, is this what was going on? Were they inhabiting avatars and their real bodies were, I don't know where their real bodies were. Were they flesh and blood? Were they ever flesh and blood? Is this the miners? Is this the nature people? Like, were they like the Anunnaki? Did they come in avatars like in the movie Avatar? Is that what happened? Like they made an avatar. So let's say if we go back to the Garden of Eden, so we think of Eve made a deal with the serpent to eat the apple. So what that was, that Eve giving the Anunnaki, the invaders, the DNA in order to allow them to create an avatar using their crystal technology. And their crystal technology is based on mining Gardens of Eden, essentially. So they cut down trees and mushrooms and mine the roots and all that, and then they use that to make their crystal goo, their programmable crystal goo. So did they come in day one to the Garden of Eden? Did they talk to Eve, talk to Eru, for example, in the Irish situation? So Eru agrees to allow them to create an avatar and gives them the DNA, which allows them to then come into this world in the Garden of Eden. Then they start to chop down the trees. Then there's wars, the old wars of the Hindu Vedas, which we talked about. The first fall of man, the destruction of that Garden of Eden, and the first civilization that was created. I don't know, that was probably a crystal civilization, and where the land masses, so let's say Ireland was much bigger, probably connected to England and France, and the whole world was starred out after a period of God knows how long. Could be hundreds of thousands of years, could be a few thousand years. But is this what was happening? They were just blasting their consciousness into these avatars, and the avatars were having it out in the wars, and nobody was winning the wars. And then they'd kidnap the real person from time to time. You'd hear about that a lot, kidnapping, but they'd never kill them. You hear about that in the tales of Egypt. And then you got this badass fella here who's like he's like a nano, like he's like the ultimate. Is that actually what they had going on? Like a super nanobot, like he pulls flesh onto himself there. That's the John Connor of the most recent one. Or that's the Terminator of the most recent one, who is, spoiler alert, the John Connor. Uh, spoiler alert. Hilarious. So, could it be? Is it possible? I don't know. All of this too, like clothes, like some sort of crazy crystal nanotech, blow your mind kind of stuff. So that's where we ended. That's where we ended up thinking. We were like, right, what happened? What happened? So as far as we could see, we had a civilization, a Garden of Eden civilization that was invaded, that was cut down. They used the trees to make this crystal, this programmable crystal, which they then used to build the civilization. So the stars and the canals everywhere, the wells, the star forts, the pyramids, all of that, which is now limestone and sandstone and granite and marble, that was all made and mixed, and that was like a programmable liquid crystal, or even not even liquid. It was just a nano crystal. I don't know what it was, whatever it was. And then they had this tech powering the whole world, and they had all of these stars everywhere, like the roses, and the people were the two roses, the white rose and the red rose. The wars of the roses are the wars and the battles of the end of this world. So the battles that took place, which caused all of this tech to be turned off. So they turned off the power, and these guys just froze because they couldn't kill them because they just splodge. And they look. If you haven't seen Terminator, you totally have to watch Terminator. It's epic. And then that was the end of Atlantis. It was all covered in mud, and all of the stars were splodged, and all of these were fortresses, and this whole civilization was a massive, beautiful star civilization, highly technological. I don't know where nature came into it, but I'm sure they just controlled nature. They had like magical apples, the magical apples of Iduma. They had the hazelnuts of the well of Segis in Carberry, the magical hazelnuts that fell into the well, and then the salmon ate them. And salmon ate the hazelnuts, and then that granted the salmons the wisdom. And then if you ate the salmon, you got wisdom. And that was Segis as well. So they had all magical food and stuff as well. But that all ended. And who emerged from it? We had the Wars of the Roses. We had the 1500s, which is the Reformation. We're going back. We looked at the 1600s as the time of the change, the time of St. Patrick coming to Ireland, the time of the Wars of the Roses, the time of the Reformation. We looked at the timing. The timing was I 500, I 600, not the 1600s. Like the 600, they added the 1,000 years. We looked at that, and that makes a very, very big difference to what was going on. So when we look at it and we say, well, the world of Atlantis, the world of the stars, ended sometime in the last couple of 100 years. And we reached those conclusions because everything was so sharp, that the buildings were so sharp, just the walls, all of the lines, they just looked immaculate. They were so sharp. You look at the lines on the cathedrals. You look at the lines on pyramids that have been dug out of the ground in Mexico. They're not that old. So we said we're looking at the last couple of 100 years, and somebody has emerged out of that last couple of 100 years in the new world. So a new world has begun, and it was around the 1600s. It was the beginning of the 1600s, the flight of the Earls in Ireland, where the Inales and the Tyrconnells fled Ireland, the last of the Gaelic chieftains. So were they the last of the Normans? So these are the Normans here, who I'm proposing are these were the people of Rus. They were the inhabitants of Ireland, England, Scotland, France, Spain, Rome, or Italy, Germany, possibly even as far across into Moscow, further afield again. And we proposed that these are the people who were defeated, and we looked at a couple of the characters involved. We said, were they the Moors? Also, the Moorish Moors, Moors, also has ROS in it. This is Eru, then the goddess, who was apparently the one who gave Ireland to the Milesians. She's the central role. She is around since the very beginning. And I would say that she could very well be one of the original nature goddesses of the land. Before the miners came in, so before the Star Civilization, I think that this goddess plays a major role. And still today, I think that she is. She was responsible for bringing nature back. She is the one that allowed all of the wells to be exploded. She is the one that made an agreement with American to allow the Milesians to become the rulers of Ireland, and for the Tuatha Dé Danann, the magical beings, to be disposed of during a time in Ireland where the kings, the three kings, were fighting with each other. And then Eru left the invaders. She agreed with them at Ishnuk, the hill of Ishnuk, the fortress of Ishnuk, the mountain of Ishnuk, the mountain of Eru, the mountains where the gods used to reside. She is the one who is responsible for the change of guard in Ireland, and she could very well still be that person. Is she the goddess of Irish rivers? Herself and her daughters and her mother Ernmas, the original queens of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the original Tuatha Dé Danann race, the original nature people, before the mining, before the crystal cities, before technology and avatars. Was she a Titan goddess? Who knows? Oh yeah, we were talking about them all being big too. All these guys, big. These guys here, big, tall. Not the same size as us. We're just mini in comparison. All those buildings, they were all big. Angus, the son of Boan. We're also saying, is this Boan, the wife of Nuada, the wife of Segis? Is she Boan, who had the affair with the Dagda, and they had the son Angus, the lover, and we likened Angus to many characters. We looked at the possibility of, is he linked to that final character of the slave revolt, and is he the guy? Is he Marduk? Is he Saint Patrick? Is he the one that gathered all of the slaves together? Maybe the slaves, maybe the slaves were the flesh and blood. And maybe the avatars had control. Who knows? And maybe this was a revolt by the flesh and blood against the avatars, led by the slaves. Maybe the flesh and blood became enslaved during these final years of Atlantis. Like, the stories of Atlantis are crazy, So we just cannot discount anything. But we do know that the final demise of Atlantis came when there was a slave revolt, or by the looks of it, it seems that the slaves, in conjunction with the goddess Eru, Saint Patrick with the agreement of Eru, or American with the agreement of Eru, depending on how you want to read it, they took over the land of Ireland. And is that indeed the land of the world? Is there some sort of microcosm, macrocosm at work here? With all of the avatars, how big was the human population actually at this time, and how many avatars were there at this time? Saint Patrick and the triple goddess, the Morrigan, he was an ambassador for, so Eru, Banba and Fowla, the triple goddess. He says Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but I would probably myself equate it to the Morrigan, because it fits with the story. Fancy book, incantations, fancy gear, St. Patrick. My money is on him to be the major instigator of, we spoke about how he went to all of these places, the places of Patrick, and how he blessed them all. And they didn't seem to work out too well for any of the places he visited, because if they were fortress, pyramid, mega wells, now they're mountains, so it didn't work out too well. And then you've the stories of all the gods being buried in the mountains. So were they literally buried in the mountains, is what I'm thinking, like buried in mud, buried in the mountains. The resting place of Luglavada and Eru is apparently at Ishnach, buried in the mountain. And St. Patrick is buried in a mountain as well himself for his troubles. So who were we left with? So in the 1600s, after the change of what I think was the change, so I don't think it was that long ago by the looks of the masonry and the way history has gone. I think that they've looped history since the 1600s. So I think they've made the 1600s, the 1700s, and the 1800s all essentially the same in terms of kings and queens and battles. And then the mid 1800s, 1850, our history kind of begins with the Great Famine. And then after the famine, history kind of begins then. And this is a trend across most of the world that history really only begins properly in the 1850s, that you can trace it back to. Everything before that is very colonial and a lot of wars and battles and changing faces and changing names and deaths and marriages, and it seems to loop and loop. So here you've got James. This is James, the King of England, James the First. We looked at him. He was, in my mind, he was possibly one of the Norman kings who was on the side of good. And they painted him as the King of England during the 1600s, the early 1600s, when we had the Battle of Kinsale and the flight of the Earls in about 1607, I think, when the last Gaelic chieftains left Ireland. So they painted James as the king who oversaw that. So he was a major character during this time of changeover. He's also shown as a darker skinned fella. So he looks much darker. He looks kind of Spanish there. So that's another picture of James. And here it says that he is the king of Britain, France, and Ireland. So once again, this is in I-608. So we've got the I-608. We have the recognition that Ireland, France, and Britain are the same. And this guy is apparently the head of that group of nations. So we're thinking star civilization here. We're thinking Normans. We're thinking old world still at this time. So he was a figure in the old world. He is one of the two of these, and the other one is his sister, I think. I-583 again. So he was around during these times. He was a prominent figure. And you had Oliver Cromwell then in the late 1600s. He was another important figure for these times. He oversaw the battles in County Meath and County Louth and Drogheda. He was a very prominent figure in the plantations of Ireland and the clearing of the remaining Irish and slaying of the remaining Irish. So the story goes. Personally, I think that in the early 1600s, there was no real slaying going on. I get the feeling it was more of just a clean-up operation, and the people were largely, what we're seeing about people into the workhouses, people going into workhouses and things like that. I think that that's essentially what was happening after these battles. And even we need to consider that maybe this could have happened in the early 1700s. Time, it's a couple of hundred years anyway. It could be 200, it could be 300, it could be 400. What gives me the thought that it's 1600 is that a lot was apparently happening all over the world in the 1600s, and it correlates with the British colonial story. Britain were colonising the United States at the time. You had John Dee over. He was the advisor to Queen Elizabeth. So Queen Elizabeth was was queen at the time in the late 1500s, I think. And you had John Dee over doing her dirty work, working on rivers, the Susquehanna River in New York. And if you look at Susquehanna Mike, he does great work on that. But there was a lot of work being done on the rivers in the 1600s. And then if you think of trying to get civilization back in order, would it take a couple of hundred years? It probably would. What was happening during this time, I don't know. All I know is that it seems that in the 1850s, Irish people came out of the workhouses, and that's when our history really began again. Everything before that, I think, is a retelling of the same story involving the same characters. Here's James II. He was another character around the 1600s. I think he's the same guy as James the First. I think that this just James 1, James 2, there they are again. James the Sixth of, oh, they have it like James the Sixth of Scotland and first of James the First of England, I think. That's the way it works. This is Louis of France. They loved these shoes and the tights. I don't know what was going on. They were into it. They loved it. And this is after the end, I'd say. Like, I think in the 1600s, you had this re-emergence of the people who they picked up. They moved into the old buildings. They came out of wherever they were hiding, and they picked up civilization. They rounded up the remaining humans. There was no avatars left because the tech was turned off. All the churches, the canals were gone. All the tech was gone. The crystal had turned to limestone. All the crystal was done. Everything looked like masonry. The marble looked like, just wavy rock. The metal was now rock solid. It wasn't programmed anymore. And these guys, they took their swords and the jewels and the gowns that all used to have, they were all from a different world and a different time. And they rounded up the populations and they made up the stories. They rewrote the history. And then you ended up eventually with this guy here, William of Orange. This is William of Orange. And this is the daughter of James. So here you see the daughter of James, who I think was potentially a Norman, so of the side that were conquered. And I think that William is the side of the conqueror. And he took her as a bride, William did. And the 1600s may as well have been the 1800s in Ireland, I suppose. This is William and Mary again. So William of Orange. So this is son of William of Orange of Holland, who became the King of England. And this is Mary Stuart, who was the daughter of James that we looked at a moment ago. And they became the kind of main lineage that were involved during this time of change and takeover. And that's the same all over Europe and all over the world. And they seem to be the two people where history restarts again then. And that is where the story kind of stops in the 1600s. Or in the late 1600s, the early 1700s. So I definitely think that there's a possibility that all of what we are told about time frames and history and everything about it, I think we need to take time frames with a pinch of salt. We need to look at the history of the world with a pinch of salt. And we need to say the battles that they tell us happened over long periods of time. Was there just one battle and was there just one takeover of an epic end to an epic civilization that happened only a couple of 100 years ago? It got covered in dirt and mud, gigantic masonry, flooded out and destroyed. And all we're left with is the remains popping up at the top. We've got underground tunnel systems, we've got destroyed rivers, we've got destruction everywhere. And the world that we live in is very different than that old world. But we have nature back again, which is amazing. And I do not want to go back to the crystal world. I have looked at the crystal world now, and I think if I lived in it before, I definitely don't want to live in it again. I don't think it didn't end very well. And I think let's go with the nature civilization. Let's go with nature and trees and take care of each other. Like, the world is changing again at the moment during these times in 2020. We're coming to the end of 2020 here. And there's a new world emerging once again. And a new world of technology is creating itself. So with that, lads, I must bid you all good day and thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, take a listen to some of the episodes from the other or from the full series if you want more details about how these possible conclusions or how possibly these conclusions could be drawn. Thank you so much for listening. think good thoughts, and continue on the journey and continue on the research while we have the opportunity to do so. Because I have a feeling that in time we won't always be afforded this luxury. So peace out, lads. Think good thoughts.